You wake before dawn, the air is cold, the ground beneath your feet is damp with morning dew, and a river glitters quietly in the distance. Around you, endless plains stretch toward the horizon. There are no fences, no checkpoints, no warning signs telling you that you have crossed into someone else's territory. You can walk east until the sun disappears. You can follow the river north for weeks. You can climb every hill you see. No soldier will stop you. No official will ask for your name. No one will tell you that you need permission to exist where you are standing. For almost all of human history, this was normal. The world had mountains, forests, rivers, deserts, and oceans, but it did not have countries. That idea, the belief that every piece of land belongs to a political community with defined borders, is astonishingly new. Yet today, more than 8 billion people organize nearly every aspect of their lives around it. Your passport, your nationality, your legal rights, your taxes, even the language printed on your money all depend on a concept that barely existed for a tiny fraction of our species' history. So, where did countries come from? The answer begins long before kings, armies, or governments. It begins with a much simpler question. Who did you belong to? If you had asked a human living 40,000 years ago where they were from, they probably would not have pointed toward a location on a map. They would have pointed toward people, your family, your relatives, your hunting group. For roughly 96% of Homo sapiens' existence, humans survived in small bands that usually contained between 20 and 50 individuals. These groups wandered across enormous landscapes following migrating animals, seasonal plants, and fresh water. Their home was never a fixed location. It was each other. There was no need for borders because survival depended on movement. When food disappeared, people moved. When the seasons changed, people moved. When resources became scarce, they simply looked for another valley, another river, another forest. Land was not owned, it was shared. Or perhaps more accurately, it was simply used. This way of life also matched the limits of the human brain. Evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar proposed that humans can comfortably maintain meaningful relationships with only about 150 people. Beyond that number, remembering every friendship, rivalry, obligation, and alliance becomes increasingly difficult. Inside a small hunter-gatherer band, everyone knew everyone else. You knew who had shared food during the last hunt. You knew who owed favors. You knew which families argued and which children played together. Trust did not depend on written laws. It depended on memory. It depended on reputation. And perhaps, most importantly, it depended on constant face-to-face interaction. Imagine trying to govern a modern city this way. It would be impossible. No human brain can personally know hundreds of thousands, let alone millions of people. Something larger than family would eventually become necessary, but humanity did not invent that solution overnight. The first major change happened when people made a decision that completely transformed their relationship with the land beneath their feet. They stopped moving. Around 12,500 years ago, communities in the Levant began building permanent homes. Archaeological sites such as Ain Malaha reveal stone houses, storage pits, grinding stones, and carefully prepared cemeteries. These people were still hunter-gatherers. Agriculture had not fully developed yet. That detail surprises many people because it reverses the story most of us learned in school. Settlement did not necessarily follow farming. In some places, settlement came first. Once people remained in one location throughout the year, the ground itself became different. A campsite can be abandoned without much thought. A village cannot. You build houses, you repair walls, you store food, you raise children. Then something even more powerful happens. You bury your dead. The moment generations of your ancestors rest beneath the same soil, that land becomes more than a useful resource. It becomes memory, identity, home. Archaeologist Colin Renfrew argued that many early burial monuments also acted as territorial markers. Long before stone walls divided landscapes, graves silently declared that a community belonged here. The first borders may not have been drawn with fences. They may have been drawn with ancestors, but even villages had limits. A settlement of 50 people can still rely on personal relationships. A settlement of 500 cannot. Something else had to connect strangers who had never hunted together or shared the same campfire. That something was belief. In southeastern Turkey stands one of archaeology's greatest mysteries, Göbekli Tepe. Massive limestone pillars rise from the earth, carved with animals, symbols, and intricate reliefs. They were built around 9600 BC, thousands of years before Stonehenge and long before the pyramids of Egypt. Even more astonishing, the builders were not farmers, they were hunter-gatherers. German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt believed this discovery completely changed humanity's timeline. Rather than agriculture creating religion, shared ritual may have encouraged people to gather, cooperate, and eventually settle permanently. In other words, temples may have come before cities. Think about what this means. Humans could cooperate with relatives naturally. Religion allowed cooperation with strangers. Thousands of individuals who had never met could still believe in the same sacred stories. They could trust one another because they trusted the same symbols. That was revolutionary. It expanded human cooperation far beyond the limits of family. Every civilization that followed would rely on the same principle: shared myths, shared ceremonies, shared identities. Today's flags, national holidays, and constitutions perform many of the same psychological functions. Different symbols, the same mechanism. Yet belief alone could not create governments. Governments require resources. More specifically, they require food. Around 10,000 BC, agriculture spread across the Fertile Crescent. Wheat and barley gradually replaced an economy built entirely on hunting and gathering. For the first time, people produced predictable surpluses. Harvests could be measured, stored, protected, and eventually taxed. Political scientist James C. Scott argues that this seemingly ordinary development changed the course of civilization. Grain possesses characteristics that wild foods simply do not. It ripens at roughly the same time. It grows above ground. Anyone can estimate how much will be harvested. It can be divided into equal portions, stored for years, transported across long distances, and counted with remarkable accuracy. Underground crops such as yams or cassava are different. No official walking past a field can easily calculate what lies beneath the soil. But wheat announces itself to everyone. That visibility made administration possible. It also made taxation possible. Once a community could regularly collect surplus grain, entirely new institutions appeared. Storehouses, record keepers, managers, guards, officials. The foundations of the state were quietly taking shape. Walls soon followed. One of the earliest known examples appears at ancient Jericho, where enormous stone fortifications surrounded the settlement nearly 10,000 years ago. Scholars continue debating their purpose. Perhaps they defended against enemies, perhaps they controlled flooding, perhaps they prevented workers from leaving. Whatever their original function, one fact remains undeniable. Constructing walls of that scale required planning, organization, leadership, hundreds, perhaps thousands of coordinated workdays. No extended family could accomplish such a project alone. Administration had arrived. Once food could be stored behind walls, another transformation began. Power stopped being temporary. For most hunter-gatherer societies, equality was actively protected. Anyone becoming too arrogant risked ridicule, gossip, or social isolation. Communities developed countless ways to prevent individuals from accumulating excessive authority, but grain changed the equation. Whoever controlled storage controlled survival. During a poor harvest, everyone depended on the granary. control over food, gradually became control over people. Over generations, successful organizers evolved into permanent leaders. Prestige became inherited, influence became institutional, chiefs became rulers, villages became kingdoms. Yet kingdoms still required something essential before they could grow larger. Information. A city containing tens of thousands of people cannot function through memory alone. Someone must know who delivered grain, who received rations, who owes labor, who paid tribute. Around 3400 BC, in the Mesopotamian city of Uruk, humanity answered that problem with one of history's greatest inventions: writing. Ironically, the earliest written records were not epic poems or religious scriptures. They were accounting documents. Clay tablets recorded grain deliveries, livestock numbers, worker rations, and inventories. Civilization's first written words may have been little more than numbers beside pictures of barley. The earliest bureaucracy was born not from literature, but from bookkeeping. Countries, it seems, began with paperwork. As cities expanded, administration became increasingly sophisticated. Clay tablets multiplied, officials recorded harvests, workers received standardized grain rations, livestock was counted, fields were measured. For the first time in history, governments could monitor entire populations without personally knowing the people they ruled. But another problem soon emerged. If food was valuable, someone would eventually try to take it. That reality transformed simple settlements into political rivals. One of the earliest recorded disputes took place in ancient Sumer between the neighboring city-states of Lagash and Umma. Both claimed ownership of a fertile stretch of farmland known as the Gu-Edena. At first, the disagreement was settled peacefully. Boundaries were surveyed, stone monuments were erected. Agreements were carved into inscriptions so future generations would know where one territory ended and another began. It did not last. Within a few decades, those agreements collapsed. War followed. King Eannatum of Lagash defeated Umma and celebrated his victory on what is now known as the Stele of the Vultures. Soldiers march in disciplined formation while birds circle above the battlefield, carrying away the remains of the defeated. For perhaps the first time, archaeology preserves more than a battle. It preserves a border, not simply land, a line that claimed political authority. That idea has never disappeared. Every modern border crossing, customs checkpoint and passport office traces part of its ancestry back to moments like these. Yet drawing a line on the ground is only half the challenge. The greater challenge is convincing everyone inside that line that they belong together. That is much harder. After all, people naturally trust family members. They recognize neighbors. They remember childhood friends. But how do you persuade thousands, or eventually millions, of strangers that they are part of the same community? The answer unfolded slowly across thousands of years, sometimes through conquest, sometimes through trade, sometimes through religion, sometimes through shared laws. Anthropologist Robert Carneiro proposed one influential explanation for how early states emerged. His theory, known as environmental circumscription, begins with geography. Imagine living in a fertile river valley surrounded by mountains or deserts. As the population grows, the available farmland does not. Eventually, neighboring communities compete for the same resources. The losing side cannot simply migrate somewhere else because every surrounding landscape is hostile or already occupied. Instead, it becomes absorbed by the victor. Village absorbs village. Chiefdom absorbs chiefdom. Small territories merge into larger political systems. The process repeats again and again. Over generations, kingdoms emerge, not necessarily because humans desired empires, but because geography left them few alternatives. Archaeological discoveries reveal that violence over territory began long before formal states existed. At Jebel Sahaba, along the Nile Valley, researchers uncovered skeletons dating back roughly 13,000 years. Many carried embedded stone projectile points and repeated signs of traumatic injuries. These people did not die in a single battle. They experienced recurring episodes of conflict across many years. Farther south at Naturuk in present-day Kenya, another discovery tells an equally disturbing story. Men, women, children, even a pregnant woman. Many showed evidence of violent deaths caused by clubs, arrows, and stone weapons. The attack occurred around 10,000 years ago, thousands of years before written history, long before anyone called themselves citizens. Humans were already fighting over valuable landscapes. The borders came later. The competition came first. Not every civilization, however, followed the same path. In the Indus Valley, cities such as Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro developed astonishing levels of organization between roughly 2600 and 1900 BC. Their streets followed carefully planned grids. Their drainage systems were centuries ahead of their time. Standardized bricks appeared across settlements separated by hundreds of kilometers. Uniform weights regulated trade. Yet, unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, archaeologists have found remarkably little evidence for massive royal palaces or extravagant tombs dedicated to powerful kings. Some researchers, including Jonathan Mark Kennier, suggest that authority may have been distributed differently. Instead of a single ruler dominating society, merchants, craftsmen, and ritual leaders may have coordinated civic life through shared economic standards. If true, it reveals something remarkable. Complex societies do not always require absolute monarchs. Sometimes cooperation itself becomes the governing principle. A common system of measurement can unite people just as effectively as an army. Shared rules can become invisible borders. By the Bronze Age, states had appeared independently across several parts of the world. Egypt unified under Narmer. Mesopotamian kingdoms flourished between the Tigris and Euphrates. The Shang dynasty established political authority in northern China. Each civilization looked different. Each spoke different languages. Each worshipped different gods. Yet all confronted the same challenge. How do you organize far more people than the human mind evolved to recognize? The solution was increasingly similar everywhere. Written records, professional administrators, permanent taxation, standing armies, legal systems, and carefully controlled territory. Still, these were kingdoms and empires, not countries in the modern sense. The idea that ordinary people belonged to a nation rather than simply obeying a ruler would arrive much later. Legal historian Henry Maine described one of history's most profound transformations. Early societies organized themselves through status. Your identity came from birth, your clan, your ancestry, your family. Modern societies increasingly organized themselves through territory and law. Instead of asking, "Who are your relatives?" governments began asking, "Where do you live?" That single shift changed everything. Political philosopher Jean Bodin later defined sovereignty as the supreme authority exercised within a territory. Centuries afterward, Hugo Grotius helped establish principles that eventually evolved into international law. But perhaps the most important milestone arrived in 1648, the Peace of Westphalia. After decades of devastating conflict across Europe, competing rulers accepted a revolutionary principle. Every state possessed authority over its own territory. Outside powers should not interfere in its internal affairs. This agreement did not invent countries, but it provided the legal framework upon which the modern international system would grow. Remarkably, that framework is still recognizable today. For a species roughly 300,000 years old, the modern nation-state occupies only the final moments of our timeline. If human history were compressed into a single day, countries would appear just before midnight. Yet law alone cannot inspire loyalty. People do not willingly sacrifice for legal documents. They sacrifice for stories. political scientist Benedict Anderson famously described nations as imagined communities, not because they are imaginary in the sense of being fake, but because no citizen can personally know more than a tiny fraction of the people who supposedly belong to the same nation. You will never meet almost everyone who shares your passport, yet somehow they still feel familiar. Why? Because millions of strangers consume the same symbols, the same language, the same newspapers, the same school lessons, the same historical narratives. Printing technology amplified this process dramatically. As books and newspapers spread in local languages, people separated by hundreds of kilometers began reading identical stories. Gradually, they imagined themselves participating in one shared community. Later, industrialization strengthened that identity even further. Factories required standardized education. Governments promoted common languages. National holidays reinforced collective memory. Flags, anthems, currencies, and public institutions transformed abstract political boundaries into emotional realities. Sociologist Ernest Gellner argued that nationalism did not awaken ancient nations waiting to be discovered. It created them. People often assume countries produce national identity. History frequently suggests the opposite. National identity was carefully constructed after political borders already existed. Italy offers a striking example. When the kingdom unified in the 19th century, only a small percentage of its population spoke standardized Italian. Regional dialects dominated everyday life. Creating the country proved easier than creating Italians. Schools eventually completed that task. The French Revolution pushed the idea even further. Sovereignty no longer belonged exclusively to kings. It belonged to the nation. For the first time, citizens themselves became the source of political legitimacy. Military service changed as well. People were no longer expected to fight merely for a monarch. They fought for an abstract community called the nation. A powerful idea had become a powerful weapon. Modern borders also reveal another uncomfortable truth. Many were never chosen by the people living within them. In 1916, British and French diplomats divided much of the Middle East with lines drawn across maps thousands of kilometers away. Few local communities participated in those decisions. Across Africa, European powers carved the continent into colonies during the late 19th century, often ignoring existing ethnic, linguistic, and cultural boundaries. When independence arrived decades later, many newly formed states inherited those same borders. The lines remained, even if the histories behind them did not. The invention of countries never truly ended. The United Nations began with just 51 member states in 1945. Today, that number has grown dramatically. New nations continue to emerge. Others continue debating independence. Political maps remain unfinished. Perhaps they always will. Looking back across this immense journey, a clear pattern begins to emerge. Humans first attached themselves to families, then to villages, then to sacred places, then to harvests, then to cities, then to kingdoms, finally to nations. Each stage solved a problem created by the one before it. Agriculture produced surplus. Surplus required administration. Administration required writing. Writing enabled bureaucracy. Bureaucracy strengthened states. States encouraged national identity. And national identity convinced millions of strangers that they belonged together. In the end, a country is neither a mountain nor a river. It is not a wall. It is not even a flag. It is one of humanity's greatest collective agreements. A story reinforced by laws, education, memory, symbols, and shared belief until it becomes indistinguishable from reality itself. Tonight, you will probably return home without questioning that story. You will cross invisible boundaries that satellites recognize but your ancestors never imagined. You will carry documents proving membership in a nation that did not exist for almost all of human history. The fields, rivers, and mountains beneath your feet are ancient beyond comprehension. The idea that they belong to a country is not. It is younger than writing, younger than cities, younger than the first harvests that inspired governments to count grain and build walls. Somewhere, thousands of years ago, someone decided that this land belonged to us. Others believed it. Their children believed it. Their grandchildren defended it. Eventually, billions accepted the same idea. That simple agreement reshaped the entire planet. And perhaps that is the strangest truth of all. Countries are among humanity's most powerful inventions, not because they exist in nature, but because enough people, for long enough, have chosen to believe they do.